Ready to have your mind blown? We're diving into a story, a life transformation that's, well, pretty much unbelievable. We're talking about a guy who went from, get this, a hardcore Marxist atheist to, wait for it, an Orthodox Christian missionary.
And it's not even just the ideological gymnastics, right? It's what that shift, that huge shift did to his life inside and out in the world, you know?
So we're digging into this book review from a website, you got to love the name, God, King, and Nation. Now, right off the bat, this reviewer, they're not hiding anything. They're coming from a very specific place, orthodoxy, monarchy, nationalism, the whole 9 yards. But here's the thing.
That doesn't make the story any less wild, right? I mean, the reviewer's upfront about their views, which actually helps us get where they're coming from as they unpack, well, Themi's journey. And this is Bishop Themistocles Adamopoulos, Themi for short. And trust me, his life story is anything but ordinary.
Yeah, see, we always hear these conversion stories, right?
Yeah.
And you think, boom, instant transformation, especially with a faith like Orthodoxy. But the reviewer here, they're like, hold on, not so fast.
Yeah.
Themi's story. Way more complex, way more nuanced than that.
This was a guy, a student of history, philosophy, always questioning, always digging. And here's what I find really interesting. Despite coming from a totally different perspective, the reviewer, they actually try to understand where Themi's coming from, you know.
Totally. The reviewer even brings up other converts and how even though their paths were different, there's this common thread, like this search for something bigger.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty universal when you think about it.
Yeah, and the reviewer, coming from this strong religious background, they see atheism, and this is just their perspective, as something that could lead to nihilism, that feeling of meaninglessness, you know, something to think about for sure, especially in a world that can feel, well, kind of pointless sometimes.
Okay, big word alert, nihilism. Maybe unpack that a bit for our listener. What does that even mean?
Basically, it's the belief that nothing really matters, at all, that life inherently has no meaning. Bleak, right? But the reviewer sees it as like a potential consequence of ditching faith altogether.
Interesting, right.
Makes you think about the role faith plays in how we see the world, for sure.
And here's where the reviewer throws a curveball, right? They bring up paganism, like actual paganism, as a stepping stone back to spirituality.
It's wild, isn't it? But it kind of shows how the reviewer gets it, you know? Faith, spirituality, it's not always black and white. They're saying, look, in this modern world, we've kind of lost that sense of the transcendent, that feeling of being connected to something, anything bigger than ourselves.
And that's something a lot of people feel, right? That yearning, even if they aren't religious.
Totally. And so the reviewer's suggesting that paganism, with all the rituals and nature stuff, it can reawaken that part of us, that dormant spiritual side. Not that anyone has to become a pagan, but it's more about tapping into that, I don't know, that sense of awe, that wonder, and that opens you up, right, to spirituality, different paths, the whole shebang.
Like you're discovering a door you never even knew was there.
Exactly. It's about cultivating, get this, spiritual receptiveness. And they connect it to Themi. They say maybe, just maybe, his whole experience with 60s and 70s music, the counterculture, all that, maybe it did something similar for him, led him back to faith. Think about it. The Beatles, Eastern spirituality. It was a wild time, right? Spiritually speaking, I mean.
It really flips the script, doesn't it? I mean, we think exposure to different beliefs, you become less religious. But for Themi, it's like it made him more open to faith, just in a different way.
100%. It's all about asking the questions, being open to new ideas, new perspectives. The reviewer, and this is a great line, talks about having your soul woken up. And for Themi, that wake-up call, well, it led him to orthodoxy.
But there's another layer here, right? It's not just about what's going on in Themi's head. It's what he does, his faith. It becomes action. He goes from this deep thinker to like a man of action, service work, the whole deal.
And that's what's so powerful about it, right? It's like the reviewer's saying, look, faith, true faith, it's not just about books and debates. It's about living it, embodying it through your actions. You can tell this really gets to the reviewer, that whole idea, living your faith.
And Themi, he doesn't mess around, you know. He goes all in, working with people who need it most, Sierra Leone. What do you think struck the reviewer about that?
Well, the reviewer's all about walking the walk, not just talking the talk. And here's Themi, living proof, right? Anyone can talk about helping others, but he actually does it, puts himself out there in tough situations to make a real difference.
Okay, so it's one thing to read about helping those less fortunate, but Themi actually goes out and does it. He puts himself in challenging situations to make a real difference.
You got it. And this feeds into the bigger picture, right? What the reviewer's getting at, that even the small stuff, the small acts of service, it ripples out like tossing a pebble in a pond. Those ripples, they go farther than you think.
A good reminder for all of us. We can all make a difference, even if it seems small.
No doubt. But here's where things take a turn. The reviewer, they're honest. They talk about the hard stuff, too. The book's stance on nationalism, yeah, they're not shying away from that.
And this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? Reviewers like, hey, I see you, Themi, I respect your dedication, but this whole nationalism thing, not so much. Trying to balance those two things, admiring the actions, but disagreeing on a fundamental level.
It's real life, right? We all deal with it. People we think are amazing, inspiring even, but we don't agree with them on everything. Life's messy like that.
Totally. Makes you think about how we handle those differences.
Yeah.
So how does the reviewer even approach this tension?
Head on, no beating around the bush. They lay it out their own take on nationalism. Remember, the website's all about God, king, and nation, right? So they contrast that with what's in the book. It's honest, refreshing even.
Just a reminder for everyone listening, we're not picking sides here, okay? Just digging into the different viewpoints as they are in the source material.
Exactly. This isn't about agreeing or disagreeing. It's about exploring. And the reviewer, they use this example, the White Australia policy. Now, this was a big deal back in the day, restricted immigration to basically Europeans only. The book, it calls it out as discriminatory, but the reviewer, they actually defend it, saying nations, they have a right to control their borders, keep their culture intact.
Talk about a hot-button issue, even today. No wonder the reviewer felt it was important to address.
Which shows how complicated it is, right? Deeply held beliefs on all sides, finding middle ground. Sometimes it feels impossible. But here's the thing, the reviewer, they don't let this disagreement overshadow Themi, his whole story. They end on a really interesting note, actually.
They do, and it's even more interesting because it's so abrupt. It's like they had more to say, but ran out of room, What do you think they might have added those missing sentences?
Talk about a cliffhanger. But maybe that's the point. The Themi's story, it's not wrapped up in a bow. It makes us think about faith, about action, about how we deal with the world, even when we disagree.
Makes you think, for sure. And for our listener out there, maybe they're thinking, this is all well and good, but I'm no missionary. Why should I care? What's the takeaway, the big one?
I think it comes down to this. We all have beliefs, right? Do they push us to act, to do something, even something small? And how do we handle it disagreeing with people we admire, especially about things that really matter? That's the stuff that keeps you up at night, right?
No doubt about it. And on that note, this deep dive, it's a wrap. But the conversation, that's just getting started. What will you take away from Themi?